Hi, everybody. I'm Grace Collins, and this is Quill Colette. I use they, them pronouns, and we are here from Snowbright Studio. So a few of you might know me from back when I used to work in the Obama administration and later in the Trump administration. I worked a lot on game-based education, and that's where a lot of you, I think, got to know me for the first time here at Games for Change and other conferences where we talked a lot about how playing games can really turn around a kid's life. And a lot of you didn't know, at the same time, I was doing a lot of work on STEM education. So we did a lot of important work back then. And later on, ended up leaving the government, right? I went and worked at an all-girls high school, actually teaching computer science in the classroom every day. And around then found that there were some things that we got right at the Department of Education, and there were some things that maybe we could have done a little bit better. And so after teaching in the classroom again, I came around to the realization that we kind of needed another company out there. We kind of needed something to continue the mission of the work that we had been doing and actually put it into practice. Because, I don't know, spoiler alert, like, it's a little bit hard to get developers and artists and creative types into the federal government. So maybe that's a surprise to you. I don't know. And so being on the outside now, it's been an amazing opportunity for us at Snowbright Studio and other places, other partners that we have, to be able to get out there and actually make the stuff that we kept talking about in the government. So we're so excited to share that with you. But I am not the best marketer in the world. So I'm going to say something now before I forget, which is that you all should go follow us on Twitter. We're Sprite Studio. That's it. That's what I had to say. And we have a Kickstarter coming up too, that maybe we could talk a little bit about later if we have more time. So, but today I wanted to talk you through a little bit of the journey that we had in getting to Time Tales and the journey that we spent creating Time Tales as well. So our company was really founded on a mission. It was more of a promise, really, that every student should be a part of solving the biggest challenges of today and tomorrow, right? And I believe that games are a pathway to that. I believe that in the past, books were that pathway, and you know there was a lot of work that went into integrating books in every classroom. And I believe we're at that same moment with games, really, trying to find that pathway to make games accessible to everyone. For me, when a school or a kid doesn't have access to games, that really becomes almost a civil rights issue. It's the same thing as taking away other learning resources, because games can be some of the best learning resources that a kid can have in school. So when I talked about the STEM gap a little bit earlier, what we were talking about here is that in the United States, more women than men go to college, right? But actually each year, there's about 250,000 more students who are men graduating with STEM degrees than women. STEM here meaning science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, you would think that maybe that gender gap had closed over the past 10 years. But if you look at this chart, it's actually gotten worse. So what we've been doing for the last 10 years hasn't been able to keep pace with what we need to do. So as we've looked at that problem through a variety of different game-based lenses, we've come around to a lot of the solutions that other people have used and kind of looked at, right? So here's Scratch, and most of you probably know about Scratch, right? Awesome free program available from MIT. And it's used a lot in early coding situations. I taught with this too. In fact, when I was teaching 9th grade girls and gender diverse students, I taught every single one of them Scratch, right? That's how we got around to variables and loops and all that sort of stuff. The problem was that I noticed that a lot of them had already done it. In fact, some of them had done it all the way since kindergarten, right? So here they were at 5 learning Scratch for the first time. And here I was with them at like 13 and 14, and they were still learning Scratch. That was a problem. They needed something to move on to. So when they asked me, well, where can we go after this because we love Scratch so much? Well, then sometimes they ended up in Unity, which is an amazing program, but it's scary. It scares me as a professional sometimes. And it certainly scared a lot of the 13-year-old kids that I had in my class. When you look at the interfaces and the difference between them, it's a huge jump. Now, Unity can actually be pretty simple to use, but to get over that confidence hurdle and to begin taking apart and understanding the basics is a challenge. And there's no bridge, right? There's no bridge between Scratch and Unity. So that's what we set out to create. Now, we were lucky to get partnerships with a whole bunch of really the best partners that we could ask for. So we worked directly with Games for Change on some of the design aspects of this. We worked with Unity in narrowing our focus and finding the right audience for these components. We worked with the Entertainment Software Association Foundation, who believes strongly in our mission. And most of all, we worked with the US Department of Education's SBIR program because they saw the vision too, that there was a gap missing here, and that this gap in learning game development and game design wasn't just a way to get kids to have fun. I mean, certainly they did, right? But it was a career pathway. It was a STEM pathway. So I saw with my own eyes, right, these students going in, playing around with Scratch, becoming enamored with games, eventually getting up to Unity, and then going from Unity into college for computer science, and then coming out of college, right, going into computer science fields, game development, software development in general. So this is a look inside Unity, inside of Timetales, which is entering Steam Early Access at the end of this month. So this is the first level in episode 1, and you can see it doesn't look like a whole lot of other learning games. And we're lucky to have Quill here to tell us a little bit more about that later. But you can see it's bright colors, it's a narrative design, it's point and click adventure, it's got a giant chocolate bunny, and all kinds of other crazy and kooky colors. And what our hypothesis is that kids don't like reading manuals. Maybe that sounds obvious, but for a lot of learning games, it's not. For us, it's not about manuals, it's about a story, right? So all of Timetales is actually set in a historical narrative. These two cats who are from the 1980s travel throughout time, repairing glitches in history, and doing that using a Unity-like interface. So in this first episode, which is the one that's going to be launching on Steam at the end of this month, this first episode, they go back through the American Revolution. And here, they actually get a chance to see Catrick Henry's famous speech in Virginia. So, but the problem, of course, is that there's a giant chocolate bunny in the way, which is, by the way, a time glitch because it didn't even exist in the 1770s. That's something I learned while making this game. So after they click on the rad button, students can actually pull up a Unity-like interface to engage with. Now, you'll probably notice this interface does not look scary at all. There's no student fainting in the aisles after looking at this. It's simply 3 boxes. And so that's really our learning strategy here, right? By being able to reduce components of Unity down to individual pieces, we can focus the students' attention and slowly reveal the interface over time to them so that they can focus on the parts that matter and not feel immediately overwhelmed. Now that was episode 1. Episode 2, which is likely to release later this year or early next year, focuses on the 1920s, Amelia Earhart, Bessie Coleman, the Harlem Renaissance, and a couple of other moments. Here you can see one of Langston Hughes' famous poems, and you can see how we've actually upped the difficulty and the complexity of the puzzles by this point. At this point, we're not looking at just moving around chocolate bunnies anymore. We're actually looking at finding different objects in a Unity interface. Here it might be fast or the bird, which is off to the side. Sorry, this is a spoiler if you're going to play the game later. And the little cat skull here. You're going to need to find them, rotate them, in some levels scale them, and move them over into position. Now again, when I was teaching Scratch and Unity, I had to spend a week or two, honestly, talking about digital space with my students because it was so new to them. And so this game allows it to be encapsulated. And then from here, we're hoping to move on to much greater vistas. So you'll see here an animation that covers how we anticipate this interface developing over time. At first, in episode 1, we're only focusing on positioning in digital space, which can be a very challenging concept. Later on, we move on to scaling, rotating, and other positioning. But then we move on to things like materials and to shape creation and other things that we have, other surprises that we have in store. In each episode that we go through, we're going to be covering different time periods and engaging students in conversations, honestly, about history that they may not have learned elsewhere. So before I pass it over to Quill, I just want to read a couple of the things that we had said to us, feedback that we'd received from students, because we actually ran a pretty robust pilot study around this at 4 different schools. And of the participants that responded to our work, 100% of them, right, 100% of them reported that Time Tales would particularly interest their female students. And we thought that that was particularly interesting when we dug into that a little bit. And this was with about 24 teachers who had participated in the game that were separate from the pilot study. We found that a lot of them felt that this was a different experience for them than other coding experiences, that the colors, the design, the humor approach, the focus on female figures in history, and other things like that really spoke to a different side of the classroom, so to speak. And that was a really exciting thing for us to hear. When we spoke to parents, we got back quotes like, "Looks like a great way to introduce coding to my daughter. Looks engaging and fun for kids and for adults," right? And also, one of my favorites was, "George Washington was a lot of fun," which is not a comment you usually hear students say. And I think another thing that was really important to me personally was to read that one respondent said, "I love its appeal to language and humanities kids as well as STEM kids." And I think, again, that's at the heart of what we are trying to do here. And if you're going to take something away from this presentation, I hope that you might take that away too. That there is developing in our field, because game-based education is still relatively new, there's developing a way in our field to think about game-based learning. And to some extent, folks are kind of copying each other a little bit. And the problem there is that we end up missing kids, right? We're trying to do something really new here and something really different because we think that it'll appeal to different types of kids. And at least our preliminary studies show that. So I hope that what you take away from this, in addition to interesting facts about chocolate bunnies, is that, explore more with stories, with colors, with humor, with, getting out there and seeing what might not be the typical way of approaching STEM topics, because then you're likely to not hit the typical kinds of STEM students, which is maybe what we need. So with that, I will pass it over to Quill, who can talk a little bit about the design and art process.
Right. Hi, everyone. I'm Quill. I'm the creative manager at Snowbright Studios. I'm really excited to talk you through how to make a time tale. So on the subject of George Washington, we're going to talk through the scene with George Washington. The whole style of time tales is cute, clean, and colorful cats. That's really what it encapsulates. I wanted to make the graphics really fun and engaging because, as came up in one of our early meetings when we were originally talking about time tales, I said, when I was learning in school, I really hated history class. It was boring and I could not find anything even remotely interesting about it. So having something that looks like a cute cartoon that you might watch after school instead of reading through a textbook might make learning a little bit more interesting. So that's what I went with. I wanted something very cute and engaging. Big heads, big eyes, big foreheads with small noses and mouths. That's kind of like the general formula that you can distill cuteness down into. That's like the science of cute, if you will. On our next slide, I will show everyone.
Sorry, I'm
Um,
slow on the slides.
Oh, you're good. So the next slide, it shows kind of some of the research that I did before starting this scene. Always use reference when you're making art. That's the most important thing. You can't draw what you don't. If you don't know what it looks like, you can't draw it. So crossing the Delaware, when Washington was crossing the Delaware, it probably doesn't look like that famous painting where everyone is standing very nobly on the ship. It was probably on a ferry in the middle of the night, much like that Mort Kunstler painting that I have up there. So it was kind of interesting because I wanted to find like a good middle ground between historical accuracy and like the popular conception of like what those historical events really looked like. Um, so after I do my research, then I get into sketching. And so I take those ideas, I kind of distill them down, and you get something that looks like this. So this was my sketch for this scene. As you can see, I overlaid the UI, so I don't put anything that's important underneath something, that would hide it. So everything is kind of pushed up in the composition. It's all very high up there, but with the UI there, it all kind of starts to make more sense. Everything that's in red was something that I wanted to plan to be able to be moved. So everything that is in blue is stationary. Everything that is red is going to be able to be moved around the screen. So after I do the sketch, I move on to Adobe Illustrator, which is how I used, is the program that I use to make all of the art. Everything is in vector, so it all scales really nicely, and it's easy to move around in. I have worked in Illustrator a lot in my career before this, so it was just kind of like a natural step for me to go from what I was doing before to doing Illustrator for this as well. So this is what the scene looks like once it's all rendered out. And then on the next slide, you can see that I overlaid the UI on top of it. So you can kind of see what's going on there. That's what the scene will look like and when it's all done and put together. So yeah. And then on the next slide, I just wanted to point out that there's, again, on George Washington, I really wanted to capture that that stoicism that you get in all of those portraits of George Washington. He's always a very serious looking cat. And that's kind of the thing that I focused on for all of my characters of historical figures is I really wanted to create, I really wanted to be able to pass along that like that notion of like who that character was, even though they're a cat. So, when you look at say Amelia Earhart, yes, Amelia Earhart, you can look at her and go, oh, that's Amelia Earhart. You have to find those hooks that are easily identifiable in the art. So, Time Tales coming to Steam summer 2021.
Yeah, you should see a coming soon area pop up in Steam for Time Tales a little bit later this week, actually. Just had a meeting about it today. And then you'll see it arrive on early access at the end of the month. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot sometimes, right? Because there are ways to learn Unity. We had a kind of a really strong heart to heart at the start of this of like, well, we can more efficiently and cheaply create something that will teach Unity by recreating an interactive manual. Like that's an option for us, right? Or even just stringing together YouTube videos. But it wouldn't get us to the place that we wanted to be, right? So when we had 70 students in one of the pilot studies, and a majority of them said that Time Tales held their attention the whole time. And that's just not true for YouTube videos, right? And that's not true for manuals either. So although it might seem silly that we're over here wondering how to make George Washington into a cat, it seemed to have a real impact on the students that we were working with. I'm sure you have a ton of other questions about the art, design, the historical aspects, the study, any of that sort of stuff. So we're coming up with, sorry, Quill was supposed to announce the Q&A, but here I am doing it anyways. So we're going to be over in the Spark room for Q&A after. Would love to meet you there. And again, on Twitter, we're at Sprite Studio, and we have a Kickstarter coming up. Don't forget.